You're tuning in to Creepy Time, where we bring you chillin', creepy stories and eerie urban legends every day at 6 p.m. To support Creepy Time, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss the story together. Now let's dive into today's tale, Morgue Night Duty Rules. They say desperation makes you blind, but I think it just sharpens your focus on what's immediately in front of you. In my case, what stood in front of me was the decaying facade of Hawthorne County Medical Center, deep in the folds of rural West Virginia, a place people only whispered about if they remembered it existed at all. I was 28, a failed med student whose future had been sliced open by one careless mistake and stitched back together with student loans and broken promises. And when the hospital posted a job listing for a night shift attendant at their morgue, I didn't hesitate. I needed money, plain and simple. Pride doesn't pay off debt. The first thing that hit me wasn't the cold rain as I pulled up to the hospital on my rusted out bike. It was the silence. That kind of deep, heavy silence that doesn't belong in a place where life and death intersect every day. You'd expect the hum of machines, the murmur of nurses, maybe the occasional metallic rattle from deep inside, but Hawthorne's silence was different, heavy, like the air itself didn't want to carry sound. The Human Resources office was empty when I arrived. No paperwork, no questions, just a nod from a receptionist who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. I was sent straight down to the basement. No welcome speech. No tour, just Mr. Grayson's expecting you. That was it. I took the service elevator down alone, counting the seconds. When the doors slid open, I wondered if I'd stepped into a different building entirely. The walls were raw concrete, the lights flickering weakly above me. The air smelled metallic, a mix of bleach and something underneath, something older. At the end of the hallway stood Mr. Grayson. Imagine the kind of man who looks like he belongs underground, not as punishment, just as inevitability. He was thin, almost skeletal, with skin pale enough to pass for wax. His white hair hung over sunken eyes that didn't seem curious or friendly or even indifferent, just tired. "You're Carter." His voice rasped like old paper. I nodded. "Ethan Carter." Grayson didn't bother with handshakes, he just turned. "Follow me." I should have left then. Should have turned and taken the elevator back up, debt or no debt. But I followed him, because desperation makes you obedient. The morgue wasn't large, but it felt endless. Cold metal drawers lined the walls, each marked with chalk symbols I didn't recognize. The fluorescent lights flickered like they wanted to die. The smell was stronger, hair formaldehyde mixed with something acidic. Grayson led me through the rows of corpse drawers, speaking only when necessary. He showed me the refrigeration controls, the intake forms, the backup generator switch, everything practical, everything procedural. And then, without warning, he locked the office door behind us. I turned sharply, but he wasn't moving toward me. He stood beside the old desk, dragging out something from beneath it. A book. Old, thick, and bound in cracked leather. It looked like it had been handled by hundreds of hands, most of them shaking. There were stains along the edges. I told myself it was rust. I knew it wasn't leaked. "This," he said quietly, "is what matters." I remember laughing, not because I found it funny, but because it felt unreal. "A manual?" I asked, half joking. Grayson looked at me then, really looked at me. His hollow gaze cut straight through whatever nerves I was pretending not to have. "Not a manual. Rules." I frowned, but didn't speak. Something told me interrupting would be a mistake. "This morgue isn't just a room for the dead," Grayson said. His voice was calm, matter of fact. "It's a door, and someone needs to keep it shut. That's your job now." He dropped the book onto the metal desk. The sound echoed longer than it should have. I hesitated before touching it, and when I did, The leather was colder than it should have been. Every man who's worked the night shift before you has added to this. Read it, learn it, follow it. Grayson paused, eyes heavy. Break the rules and the morgue won't be the only thing that opens. I flipped the book open. The first page was handwritten in thick, uneven letters. Rule 1. If a corpse knocks, do not answer. I looked up, expecting Grayson to explain. He didn't. That's enough for tonight, he said. I'll see you in the morning, if you're here. And just like that, he left me alone. I spent that first night trying to convince myself the old man was playing some twisted initiation prank. Maybe he was testing me. Maybe this was a small town's idea of hazing the outsider. But deep down, I knew better. There was a weight in that book, a kind of dread soaked into its pages that felt too honest to be fake. The office was small, barely bigger than a supply closet. There was a single metal desk, the old terminal Grayson had pointed out, and a narrow cot in the corner. The only decoration was a wall clock that ticked far too loudly in the silence. I tried to sleep, but every sound felt amplified: the hum of the fridge units, the occasional creak of metal expanding or contracting somewhere out in the morgue. And then, around 1 a.m., it happened. 3 knocks. Not from the door. From one of the drawers. Slow, deliberate, measured. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was pipes. Maybe refrigeration units did that sometimes. But deep down, instinct screamed otherwise. Another set of knocks followed. I froze, my pulse thudded in my throat, the book's first rule burned in my memory. Don't answer. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, staring at the door to the morgue floor beyond my office, until the knocking finally stopped. When morning came, Grayson didn't ask me how my first night went. He didn't need to. He saw it in my face. Now you believe me, he said quietly. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Because he was right. That was the first night I realized the dead don't always stay still. And in Hawthorne County, sometimes they knock. I didn't want to go back the next night. After what I'd heard after those knocks, I should have quit. Told the hospital to keep its silence and its paycheck. But fear does strange things to your mind. It doesn't always push you away from danger. Sometimes it keeps you locked in place, clinging to routine as if it'll protect you. The second night, I told myself it had been my imagination. Sleep deprivation, the hum of the refrigerators echoing oddly, Grayson's twisted bedtime stories working their way under my skin. I needed the job. That mattered more than old ghost stories. When I arrived, Grayson wasn't waiting for me this time. He'd left the keys in the office door, a message maybe, or a test. I let myself in, locked the door behind me, and sat down at the metal desk, eyeing the book like it might open itself. I didn't plan on opening it again, but I did. I didn't want to admit it, but something inside me needed to read more, needed to understand what I was facing. The second page listed a few more rules, each as cryptic as the first. Rule 2. If the drawer opens on its own, do not look inside. Rule 3. If you hear singing after 2 a.m., do not hum along, no matter what you remember. There were no explanations, no comforting footnotes, just orders, written in shaky hands. By midnight, exhaustion set in, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying the first night's sounds over and over, even in the silence. I didn't trust my own senses anymore. And that's when it started again. The knocking. 3 slow knocks. Same as before. Same cadence. Same impossible source. But this time, it didn't stop. Another set of knocks came, then another, louder, closer, like whatever was inside wasn't waiting patiently anymore. It wanted something. I don't know when I stood up. I only remember my hands shaking as I unlocked the door to the morgue. The corridor stretched out in front of me, drenched in sickly green light. The knocking echoed from somewhere halfway down the row of corpse drawers. I told myself it was a loose latch, a refrigeration unit malfunctioning. Anything that made sense. I stepped forward, one foot, then another. Each step echoed too loudly. Then I saw it. The drawer. One of the mid-level units, marked with 3 chalk lines I didn't recognize. It trembled slightly as each knock shook the metal from inside. I should have turned around, should have listened to Grayson, should have obeyed the rule. But rules don't mean much when you're standing face to face with fear. My fingers found the handle, and I pulled. The drawer slid out silently, too silently. Inside lay a corpse, a young woman, pale skin, long dark hair framing a face frozen in something between sleep and pain. Her lips were blue, her eyes closed, thankfully. There was no reason for her body to be warm, but it was. I leaned in, breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to close it, to lock the drawer and pretend this never happened. But curiosity, that stupid human curiosity, kept me still. And then she opened her eyes. Just like that. No warning, no flutter. One moment closed, the next. Wide, glassy, black as ink. She stared at me, and then, in a voice that didn't sound like lungs had powered it, she whispered, "Thank you." I stumbled back, crashing into the opposite wall, heart slamming against my ribs. But the drawer didn't move. The woman didn't move. She just watched. I ran, locked myself in the office, braced the door with the desk, and sat there until morning. When Grayson found me, he didn't ask what happened. He saw it in my face, in the blood that had drained from it. "How many knocks?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. "Did you answer it?" I nodded. He sighed, not in anger, not even disappointment, just resignation. "You gave it permission," he said quietly. "That's how it works." "What do you mean?" I forced out, voice hoarse. "You acknowledged her. Now she's tied to you." "What does that mean?" Grayson's eyes looked hollow. "It means next time she won't wait to be let out." This was the moment when the story changed for me. It stopped being a job, stopped being a paycheck. This became survival. I wish I could say I was smart enough to leave then, but fear had already done its work. Fear doesn't always drive you away from the fire. Sometimes it burns you in place. I didn't sleep after that second night. Not after seeing her, not after hearing that whisper. People think fear peaks when you're in danger, but it doesn't. It peaks afterward when you're alone, questioning what you saw, what you did, what it means. That's when fear really wraps its fingers around your throat. Grayson didn't offer me sympathy, just instructions. "You'll need to keep working," he said. "Quitting won't help, not anymore." I asked him why I couldn't just walk away. He just shook his head. "You touched the drawer, you looked inside, you let her see you. That's all it takes. Once they've seen you, you belong to them, whether you're here or not. The job doesn't end because you decide it should." I wanted to think he was crazy, some old man who'd spent too many years underground, letting superstition rot his mind. But the problem was, I'd seen her too, and I'd heard her. No amount of logic could scrub that memory away. The third night wasn't supposed to be my shift. Grayson had told me to rest. But rest doesn't come when every shadow looks like a threat, and every silence feels wrong. I found myself outside the hospital again, sometime past midnight, unsure how I'd even gotten there, like something had pulled me back. When I stepped into the morgue, the air was colder than usual, and I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was Grayson waiting for me. A figure stood near the far end of the morgue, next to the drawer, the same drawer I'd opened. But the silhouette was wrong. Too still, too quiet. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. And then she moved. Not like a person. People shift weight, adjust balance. She just shifted like frames in a film cut too suddenly. One moment further away, the next closer. She stood there silently, her black eyes reflecting the dull neon lights, her skin too pale against the darkness of her hair. And then she whispered again, "Thank you." That was all it took. I ran. I don't remember reaching the elevator. I only remember the doors refusing to close fast enough and those two words repeating inside my head. Thank you. But for what? The next day, I demanded answers from Grayson. Answers he didn't want to give. He told me the morgue wasn't just built over a thin place, it was built to guard it. That door he'd mentioned wasn't a metaphor. It was real. Long before this place was a hospital, long before coal miners even touched this ground, there were rituals here, he said quietly. People who believed they could pull souls back from the other side. They carved the first morgue out of the ground itself, used it as a kind of holding place. When someone died, their body went down there. But it wasn't about preparing for burial, it was about waiting. Waiting to see if they'd come back. I wanted to argue, wanted to call him a liar. But after what I'd seen, what good would that do? The rules aren't to protect the living from the dead, Carter. They're to protect the living from what the dead can become, Grayson continued. Once you break a rule, once you give them a piece of yourself, they won't let go. I asked him what I should do. Follow the rest of the rules. Hope she doesn't find a way through. Hope wasn't much of a plan. That night, back in my apartment, I felt her presence. Not saw, not heard, felt. The air grew heavy in the corners of the room, colder near the windows, as if something watched from outside. And the worst part, I wasn't surprised. A part of me had been expecting her. At exactly 2:37 a.m., I heard humming. Not outside, not through walls, inside, from the bathroom. A woman's voice, soft and broken, humming a melody I almost recognized. Something from childhood, maybe, or a song I'd heard once and forgotten, but my mind remembered it. I felt the pull of it. The second I found myself humming under my breath, I bit down hard on my tongue. Rule 3, do not hum along, no matter what you remember. I stood in the darkness of my apartment, paralyzed, bleeding from my tongue, listening to the woman I'd set free hum herself closer to my bedroom door. That's when I knew Grayson was right. This wasn't a haunting. It was a hunt, and I was already marked. The next morning, I didn't go to the hospital. I went to the county records office. If Grayson wouldn't give me answers, I'd find my own. Problem was, Hawthorne County's history wasn't just forgotten. It had been buried. The official records showed nothing unusual. The hospital was built in the 1950s. Before that, the land was owned by a mining company, and before that, blank. No clear ownership, no records of settlements, like the land itself refused to be remembered. But people forget something about old mining towns. Paper records can be lost, but stories survive. I found an old maintenance worker in a diner near the highway. He was retired, half blind, and smelled like motor oil. But when I mentioned the morgue, he stopped chewing, dead silent. His spoon froze midair. I knew someone who worked down there, he said softly. I leaned in. What happened to him? The man just shook his head. He quit. Or he tried. What do you mean, tried? He stirred his coffee but didn't drink it. Hospital kept him on the payroll after he left. Paid his family too. To keep quiet. They buried his house after he died. Buried it? He finally looked at me. With concrete. I wanted to ask more, but his expression told me the conversation was over. Back in my apartment, I dug deeper, pulling late-night archives from university records. That's when I found I'd mentioned buried in an old thesis on Appalachian folklore. a secretive group known as the Order of the Last Dawn, founded in the early 1800s. Their purpose? To guard locations known as thin places, places where the barrier between life and death wasn't just fragile, was broken. The Hawthorne site had once been one of their primary locations, but after the Order's dissolution in 1952, the hospital had been built over it, not to treat the sick, but to seal something in. The morgue wasn't an afterthought, it was the lock. And now, I'd picked it open. That night, I tried not to sleep, but exhaustion wins every time. When I woke up, it wasn't to daylight. It was to darkness. Not just my apartment's usual midnight shadows. This was thicker, heavier, a kind of wrongness that pressed against my skin, and in that darkness, I heard her breathing. She wasn't humming anymore. She was waiting. I didn't light a match, didn't reach for a flashlight. I knew from the rules that sometimes light makes things worse. Instead, I sat there, listening. Her breath sounded like someone drowning, just slow, gasping pulls of air. But she didn't move, not yet. At exactly 3:15 a.m., her whisper came, "Ethan," my name, spoken like a promise. I stayed frozen until dawn. When sunlight finally broke through the cracks in the blinds, the breathing stopped, but her presence didn't leave. She was with me now, all day, everywhere, in reflections that didn't quite mirror me, in shadows that stretched in the wrong direction. I thought about running, but where do you run when what's after you isn't bound by walls? That's when I understood the cruel truth. Grayson wasn't keeping people inside the morgue. He was keeping something else from getting out, and I'd failed him. I went back to the hospital the next night, not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. My apartment wasn't safe anymore. She was in there with me. Whatever I'd awakened, it was tethered now, and it didn't care about walls. When Grayson saw me, he didn't ask questions. He just unlocked the morgue office, sat down in his usual chair, and waited. Like he knew I'd come, like he'd been expecting me all along. "I read about the Order," I said. He didn't flinch, just nodded slightly. "The Last Dawn. They were fools," he said softly. "Fools who thought they could control what they didn't understand." I wanted to ask him if he'd been part of them, but somehow I knew the answer. He'd been left behind when they dissolved, or worse, chosen. The morgue isn't a lock, Carter. Not anymore. It's a wound, and you've torn it open wider. I felt sick. "What is she?" I asked. He looked at me then, and his voice dropped to something I'd never heard before. Not fear, not anger, pity. "She's the first." The words didn't make sense. She was the first soul they pulled back, the first success, before they understood what they were doing, before they realized that pulling something back doesn't mean it returns whole. I shook my head, but she spoke to me. She thanked me. Grayson closed his eyes. "She's thanking you for letting her inside." The silence after that felt heavier than the air. I needed answers. I demanded to know how to stop her, how to break the connection. "There's no breaking it," Grayson said, "only exchanging it." "What does that mean?" He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a photograph, old, creased, water-stained. It showed a circle of men in dark robes, standing around a stone slab deep in some forest clearing. A body lay on the slab. The same ritual I'd read about. "She needs an anchor," Grayson said. "Something to hold her here. Someone. That's you now. Unless what? Unless you give her someone else." I stared at him, horrified. "You're telling me to sacrifice someone?" "I'm telling you how I've survived." The realization hit like a gut punch. "You replaced yourself." He nodded, expression dead. 40 years ago, I was like you, curious. Thought I could control it. Broke a rule. She came for me, so I found someone else. Brought him in, trained him, watched her shift to him. You used me. I saved myself. My hands shook with rage, but also fear. Because a part of me understood him. A part of me knew what he meant. You can't outrun her, Carter. You can't hide. She doesn't chase you. She waits. She's patient. And sooner or later, you'll beg for a way out. I stood there, unable to speak, unable to think. And when that day comes, Grayson said, you'll understand why I did it. I left the morgue that night knowing two things. One, I was alone. And two, sooner or later, I'd have to decide who dies to save me. For the first time since taking the job, I stopped being afraid of Grayson. Not because he wasn't dangerous, but because I understood him now. He was a dead man walking. He just hadn't admitted it yet. I wasn't ready to be him. Not yet. That night, instead of waiting for her, instead of letting the terror close in, I fought back the only way I could, by researching, digging deeper. Somewhere, someone had to have faced this thing without becoming a monster. I've found nothing in books, no scholarly papers, no archived websites. The Order of the Last Dawn had been erased, just like Grayson said, but their stories weren't. Folklore survives where history fails. Old Appalachian legends told of veil-thin places, where the living crossed into the dead's territory, not the other way around. People who broke that line were cursed, haunted, worse. But there was one legend that stood out. A cleansing ritual. Not a solution. Not a promise. Just a possibility. I didn't understand all of it. Old English mixed with even older tongue. But what mattered was the ritual's purpose. Severing the tether between a marked soul and what hunted it. I had to try. The instructions were vague and complete. I needed three things: iron, blood, and flame. Iron was easy. Blood, less so. But that night, at 2:30 a.m., when the humming started again from inside my apartment, I didn't hesitate. I stood in the center of the living room, holding the makeshift iron spike I'd forged from dismantled hospital equipment, a bowl of my own blood from a sliced palm, and a candle burning low. I recited the words. I called her by name, because somewhere deep in the records, buried in hospital patient files from 1912, I'd found it. Eliza. Her name was Eliza. The moment I said it aloud, the humming stopped. Silence pressed in. Thick. Total. Then came the breathing. From behind me, I fought the instinct to turn. The ritual said never to look back, not until it was finished. I spoke her name again. Eliza. Her voice came next. Not whispered, not distant. Right behind my ear. Yes. I slammed the iron spike into the bowl of blood, into the flame. And then the screaming began. Not her, me. My skin burned. My head split with pain. But I didn't stop. I recited the words over and over, voice breaking, mind cracking, until suddenly, nothing. Silence. Real silence. When I finally collapsed, it was dawn. The air felt different, lighter. She was gone. At least I thought so. Until I saw what was left behind. In the center of my living room, burned into the floorboards, was a handprint. Not mine. Not human. Long fingers. Thin bones. And carved beneath it, words I'll never forget. You called me by name. Now I know yours. I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days after the ritual. Not because I felt safe inside, but because I didn't trust the world outside any more than what waited inside these walls. The name had changed everything. That much I knew. The humming had stopped. The breathing was gone. But her presence wasn't. It had shifted from pursuit to patience. Grayson called once. I let the phone ring until it stopped. I didn't want to hear more about sacrifices. I wasn't ready to trade someone else's life for my own. But that didn't mean I was free. At night I dreamed, not nightmares, memories, but they weren't mine. I saw her, Eliza. I saw her standing barefoot in some kind of stone chamber, a single candle flickering near her feet. Hooded figures circled her, chanted. Their voices blended into static, broken and wrong. Eliza's face was calm, not afraid, not angry, just empty. When I woke, my mouth tasted of ash. I thought about returning to the hospital, maybe to confront Grayson, maybe to finish what I'd started. But I knew, deep down, that the hospital wasn't the source anymore. The lock had been broken. She wasn't trapped to that place now. She was following something else, something more permanent. My name. At first, I thought knowing her name had weakened her. I wanted to believe that, needed to, but the truth is simpler and worse. Knowing her name didn't free me. It bound me to her. Grayson had said she was the first soul pulled back, but they didn't bring Eliza back as herself. They'd hollowed her out, built something from what remained. Whatever ritual those early order members performed, they hadn't resurrected a person. They'd created something else entirely. And now, every night, I saw her eyes in my dreams, not asking for help, not begging for release, just watching, waiting. I didn't understand what she wanted. Not until I woke up and found the photograph. Not on my desk, pinned to the inside of my apartment door. The same photograph Grayson had shown Meath Order members standing around the stone slab. But now, something was different. A figure had been added. Me, I stood in the circle. I stared at the photo for hours, the edges damp from my sweating hands. She wasn't trying to kill me. She was waiting for the ritual to finish. And somehow, I was part of it now. That night, when the humming returned, I didn't run. I didn't hide. I sat down on the floor, right where I'd seen the handprint burned into the wood. And when I heard Eliza's voice from the darkness, I answered, "I know you're here." Silence. "You know my name. Say it." The silence stretched thin, pulling at the edges of my sanity, until finally, soft as breath, "Ethan." My chest tightened. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. She didn't speak. Instead, a sound filled the apartment. Not humming, not breathing. Stone scraping against stone. And then, without warning, I understood. She wasn't following me. She was pulling me back. The ritual that had bound her to life didn't just bring her forward. It demanded payment, a replacement. I was never her victim. I was her successor. I didn't go back to the hospital. I didn't need to. I already knew what Grayson would say. I could hear his voice in my head, clear as the static hum in my apartment. "It's your turn," and in some sick way, he'd be right. I'd triggered something older than the hospital, older than the order. It wasn't just superstition or folklore. This was ritual, a cycle. Grayson had been part of it, and now I was next. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of stone walls, chanting voices, and Eliza standing in the center of that circle as if waiting for someone to take her place. And each time, in that dream, I saw my own face standing across from her, just outside the circle, watching, waiting. By the third night, I accepted what Grayson had known for years. I had two choices: take someone else, or take her place. I remembered what he said: "When that day comes, you'll understand why I did it. Now I did. I thought about everyone I knew, neighbors, co-workers, people from my past. It was terrifying how quickly my mind started evaluating them like candidates, not people. Could I bring someone else in? Could I lie to them the way Grayson had lied to me? It would be easy, just a few words, an offer of a job, an explanation about night shifts, pay up front. And when they started hearing the humming, it'd be too late. I hated myself for even considering it. But every night, Eliza came closer. She didn't speak anymore. She didn't hum. She just waited. Her patience was worse than her pursuit. On the fourth night, I stood outside the old maintenance corridor under the hospital. It wasn't a shift night. I wasn't supposed to be there. But the locked door swung open without resistance. Grayson was waiting inside. "You made your choice," he said softly. "No," I told him. "I'm here for answers." He shook his head. "You already know everything. There's no saving you." I stepped closer. Then save someone else. End the cycle. Grayson's smile was sad. There's no ending it. I found the rituals. I know what the order did. Then you know why we stopped. Number, I know why you stopped pretending. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, like every year he'd carried suddenly sat heavy on his bones. I asked him a final question. How do I take her place? Grayson didn't speak for a long time. Then, quietly, "You already have." I didn't understand. He explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "The moment you called her by name, you bound yourself to the threshold. That's the final act, the last part of the ritual. It was never about bringing her forward. It was about replacing the anchor. You're not hunted anymore, Carter. You're trapped." I felt sick. Every step I'd taken to fight her had sealed my fate. "Eliza's free," Grayson said, "and you're what keeps the door closed now." I staggered backward, heart hammering. "You knew," I gasped. He nodded. "She let me live because I brought her you." I lunged at him, but he didn't move. I couldn't touch him, not because he was stronger, but because I knew none of it mattered anymore. I wasn't part of the world above ground. Not anymore. I left him standing there. I don't remember the walk back to my apartment. I don't remember unlocking my door. I just remember standing in the middle of the dark room, listening to the silence. That wasn't silence at all. It was waiting. And for the first time, I understood who was waiting. It wasn't Eliza. It was me. I didn't sleep after that night. Couldn't. How do you rest when you know your life isn't yours anymore? Every breath, every thought, every heartbeat was borrowed time. I didn't bother returning to the hospital. I knew my job was over. Grayson wouldn't look for me. He didn't need to. He'd won. Eliza was free, and I was in her place. But I wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. I spent days hunting through the archives, returning to every source I dismissed before. Folklore, superstition, forgotten records, anything. Somewhere deep in the margins, I found what I was looking for. Not in a book, not online, but buried in handwritten notes collected by a long-dead priest from a town that no longer existed. His words were shaky, his descriptions incomplete, but the message was clear enough. There was a way, not a way out, a way through. The forbidden ritual. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't a blessing. It was the nuclear option. A ritual not to close the door, but to burn it down entirely. A ritual meant to sever the link between both worlds, permanently at the cost of whoever performed it. The ritual required two things. 1. The name of the first soul taken, Eliza. 2. A sacrifice not of blood, but of existence. Total erasure. The ritual didn't just kill you. It erased you. No afterlife, no memory, no legacy. Whoever performed it would vanish. No one would remember they ever lived. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. How do you choose oblivion over life? Even life as a prisoner? Even life hunted by shadows? It sounded impossible. Until I understood what Grayson had given me. I wasn't alive anymore. I was a placeholder. A key jammed into a lock. She'd left me hollow. Performing the ritual wouldn't destroy me. It would finish what she started. On the 7th night since I'd spoken her name, I prepared. I wrote down everything I'd learned. Not to save myself, but to warn whoever found the apartment after me. I sealed the notes in a metal box, buried it under the floorboards, just below the place where her handprint remained burned into the wood. Then, just before midnight, I stood in the center of the room. I spoke her name one last time. Eliza. She didn't wait this time. She appeared. No pretense. No humming. Just standing there in the half-dark, inches from me. Her skin was too pale. Her eyes too dark. Her body impossibly thin. A human shape, but not human. I didn't ask what she wanted. I didn't need to. I whispered the final words from the forbidden ritual. And for the first time, she stepped back. She understood. Eliza didn't scream, didn't attack. She waited. As I finished the chant, I felt something inside me fracture not just mind or body, but memory itself. Like my name was being scraped away letter by letter until I was nothing more than a shadow of a person I no longer remembered. I spoke the last line. Her name. Then silence. Real silence. No breathing. No humming. No heartbeat. Just darkness swallowing the apartment, the room, the world, and then nothing. Not pain. Not fear. Not even relief. Just absence. I don't know how long the nothing lasted, but eventually there was a sound. Footsteps. Someone finding the apartment. Someone opening the door. Maybe Grayson. Maybe someone new. It doesn't matter, because they won't remember me. No one will. I don't exist. I was the sacrifice. And Eliza? She's gone too. The door is closed. Not sealed. Not locked. Destroyed. Forever. Grayson stood outside the apartment building, staring up at the darkened windows. He didn't know why he'd come. Habit, maybe, or guilt. Though he'd tell himself otherwise. He felt it the moment it happened, the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of her. Eliza was gone. For the first time in 40 years, the humming hadn't followed him home. No breathing, no whispers, no pressure behind his eyes. She was gone, but so was Carter. Grayson had trained others before, brought them in, watched them fall, but Carter had been different. He'd fought, not just for survival, but for freedom. And he'd won. Grayson lit a cigarette with shaking hands and whispered to no one. "I'm sorry, kid." The apartment was quiet, but in his gut, Grayson knew something more terrible than death had taken Carter. Oblivion. A fate he'd been too much of a coward to accept himself. And now, Grayson was free, but he felt no joy in it. Because freedom bought with someone else's sacrifice isn't freedom at all. It's just waiting for the next door to open.